Welcome back everyone, Ajol here, and it's time for another PvP guide. Today's focus will be Restoration Druid for Shadowlands patch 9.1. To summarize the content of this video, we will cover race, talents, PvP talents, stat priority, and instead of discussing legendaries and covenants separately, we will talk about some builds and playstyle. Hopefully this will give you a lot more insight and better help you decide how you want to play Resto Druid. Before we get started, a big thank you to our today's sponsor SquadOV. This app has some amazing features like you can watch your matches whenever or wherever you want without needing SquadOV installed. No button is required to start recording. Recording is automatic as long as the user is properly set up and has SquadOV turned on. You can watch your friends' POVs if they have SquadOV on too. So what are you waiting for? The app is absolutely free and it's really easy to set up. Check the link in the description below. Enjoy. Now returning to our PvP guide, I'll try to keep things as simple as possible. Race pick is pretty straightforward. For Horde you want to pick Tauren as Warstomp AoE stun has a lot of uses both defensively and offensively. For Alliance, Night Elf is hands down the best race for Druid. Shadowmeld utility is unlimited, you can dodge spells, stop Maledict channel, drop combat and drink, avoid incoming CC, and the list goes on. Moving on to talents, your default pick should look like this. However, there are some variations and we can go through them one by one. We have Guardian Affinity versus Feral Affinity. This will allow different playstyles depending on what composition, covenant and legendary you intend to pick. Feral Affinity, while providing some extra damage and mobility, will allow for more aggressive gameplay and will usually fit very well with casters or classes that lack stuns and at the same time can peel for you. Playing this talent can be punishing in certain situations if you don't get peeled or you find yourself in a bad position. Some melee specs will be able to delete you in 2-3 seconds even if you are 100% HP with Barkskin activated. You should do your best to avoid getting stunned if you do not have Trinket available. Guardian Affinity will give you extra survivability in all situations and will allow you to play a more passive and defensive game, meaning that you do not have to compromise your position to land CC. Being very tanky, your number one priority is to keep HOTS rolling on your teammate and just stay away from the fight. Of course, this is not the rule, as in certain comps you may have to push in for CC, but generally speaking you need to understand that Resto Druids have the best single target healing in the game and you can out-mana all other healers. Then we have Mighty Bash versus Mass Entanglement versus Heart of the Wild. Heart of the Wild should only be used with Feral Affinity and Night Fae Covenant. We will cover this later in the video. Mass Entanglement should be used if you don't really need the extra stun and you're also struggling to stay alive versus melee specs. This talent works very well with Deep Roots PvP talent. A good example can be if you're playing with a rogue or a demon hunter. Roots can really help your team kite better in those situations. Mighty Bash, obviously the extra stun can prove to be invaluable when playing with classes that don't have excessive stuns and in general should be your default pick. Everything else should stay the same. Some players pick Renewal as well, but I honestly find Wild Charge to be a lot better for both survival and positioning. As for PvP talents, there are a lot more options depending on the enemy team. While PvP talents like Reactive Resin and Thorns are mandatory versus melee teams, these talents are useless versus casters. Mark of the Wild can be very effective against certain schools of magic. Focused Growth is also a good option if you can keep the stacks up and there is a low chance of Life Bloom being dispelled. Master Shapeshifter is mostly used with Feral Affinity for more damage, but I also find it useful versus Windwalker Monks when playing with Guardian Affinity. Deep Roots and High Winds are worth mentioning, however these talents are extremely situational. For stat priority, you should aim for 21% haste, as this will lower your GCD to 1.2 seconds, will provide extra ticks for your heal over time effects, and it also has great synergy with Verdant Infusion Legendary. After haste, you should aim for as much versatility as possible. For items where you can't get haste and versatility, try and get mastery and versatility. Also, critical strike is not important and should be avoided. As mentioned earlier, instead of covering Covenants and Legendaries separately, I will try and talk about some builds mainly centered around some of the best Legendaries. The most defensive and standard build is Necrolord, Plague Deviser Marileth with Verdant Infusion Legendary and Guardian Affinity. This can also be played with Feral Affinity for the situations we mentioned in the talent section, but generally this is the safest and least try-hard way to play the game. A more aggressive and more dot oriented build is Necrolord with either Bonesmith Hyrmir or Emeni for even more damage, with Deep Drought Legendary, Feral Affinity and Master Shapeshifter. This build does insane damage due to how Bleeds, Dots, Adaptive Swarm and Master Shapeshifter damage modifiers stack. Downside of this build is that you can easily fall behind healing due to not being able to extend your Cenarian Ward and Soul of the Forest rejuvenations. A third and more explosive build would be Night Fae, meaning Convoke, Celestial Spirits Legendary, Feral Affinity and Heart of the Wild for even more damage. This build is more setup oriented with a lot of burst. Your burst is centered around stun and convoke the spirits in a similar fashion as Feral Druids. The downside of this build is, of course, it can be predictable, and again without Verdant Infusion your healing output will be severely limited. Before we end today's guide, I want to mention a few more things. First is, with Verdant Infusion, your main priority is to always extend Soul of the Forest rejuvenations and Cenarian Ward as much as possible, as those are your highest sources of healing. Rejuvenation into Cenarian Ward, into Swift Mend, into Soul of the Forest rejuvenation. Because of how Verdant Infusion works, 15 seconds later you can again extend the same Cenarian Ward, the existing Soul of the Forest rejuvenation, and then add your second Soul of the Forest rejuvenation. By the time Cenarian Ward completely expires, you should have Cenarian Ward off cooldown shortly after its expiration. Obviously, this is a perfect scenario where you are not getting crowd controlled and nobody is purging your heal over time effects, but it should give you a general idea into a very efficient and powerful way to heal. I know many of you already know this, but I still see druids that do not abuse Verdant Infusion as they should. Also, these are some general guidelines and nothing is set in stone. I encourage you to always test new things and see what's best for you. Thank you so much for watching this far into the video. I really hope the information found here will be useful to all of you. Once again, a big shout out to SquadOV for sponsoring today's video. Share your opinions in the commentary section below. Like, subscribe. See you next time.